The crowd gathered long before the sun stood high, filling the dusty yard with restless murmurs and anxious footsteps. Every person there seemed pulled by the same rumor, a whisper that had spread from one farmhouse to the next. They said a wild horse unlike any other had been brought in during the early hours. Still fierce, still fighting, still refusing to bow to ropes or rules. Even people who had no intention of bidding came only to see it with their own eyes. The energy in the air felt charged, the way it does when something rare is about to be witnessed, and nobody wanted to miss the moment. The auction yard had seen many animals over the years, but nothing that stirred curiosity like this. At the far end of the pen stood the horse that had caused all the talk. Dark-coated, with a mane that fell in uneven waves, the animal looked carved from raw spirit itself. Even the workers kept a cautious distance as they checked the rails and tightened knots. The horse paced in sharp, strong steps that kicked dust into the air with every movement. It tossed its head, refusing any moment of stillness, and its eyes held a fire that warned everyone not to misunderstand its strength. People leaned over the fence as far as they dared, drawn by the intensity of the creature. Someone whispered that no one had ever managed to get close without risk. Someone else claimed the horse had outsmarted every attempt to tame it. The talk only grew as more people arrived. Near the front, a man with a weathered hat and steady posture watched the horse with a focus that matched the crowd's excitement. He had spent a lifetime at auctions and thought he had seen it all, yet even he seemed impressed. The way he leaned his elbows on the fence showed he was considering more than simple curiosity. Beside him stood a trader known for never letting a good opportunity slip. He inspected the horse like someone who understood its value far beyond the starting price. Their quiet competition was felt even before the bidding began. Children wove through the crowd, trying to catch glimpses between the adults. Most were drawn by the idea of a wild animal, but one young girl stood apart from the others. She held herself differently, neither nervous nor overly excited. Her eyes stayed locked on the horse with a calm, deep focus uncommon for someone her age. She clutched a small leather strap between her fingers, gripping it not like a toy but like an object that meant something to her. A few nearby adults noticed her stillness, but no one paid her much mind. She seemed too young to play any real part in a place where grown hands handled the decisions. The heat rose steadily, carrying the scent of hay, dust, and worn leather across the yard. Voices layered in waves as farmers talked over one another, making predictions about who would win the bid. Some believed the horse was too wild and dangerous for its own good. Others argued that with the right training, it could become the pride of any ranch. A few worried that the animal might injure someone if not handled carefully. That kind of unpredictability made the auction more intense. People felt excitement mixed with unease, a combination that kept everyone alert. An older man at the front raised his hand, asking whether the handlers had checked the horse for injuries. The worker nearest him nodded and said the animal was strong, difficult to manage, but healthy. The answer satisfied most of the crowd. The idea that the horse was powerful but unbroken only added to its appeal. Buyers with deep pockets shifted their weight, preparing themselves for lengthy bidding. They knew the price could climb quickly once the auctioneer took his place. As the crowd thickened, the young girl drifted closer to the front rail, finding a space between two adults who were too distracted to notice her slip in. She moved carefully, waiting for the right moment, and her gaze never left the horse. Her expression wasn't filled with fear or joy. It held something more complicated, almost protective. The way she studied every movement and every flick of the horse's ears made it seem like she understood something about it that others didn't. The horse suddenly reared, lifting high and striking the air with its hooves. Gasps scattered through the crowd. The workers rushed to steady the ropes, pulling with all their strength. Dust surged upward as the horse landed again, muscles rippling beneath its coat, breathing hard and wild. People stepped back from the fence in alarm, though none could take their eyes off the scene. The moment only confirmed what everyone already believed. This was not an ordinary animal. The auctioneer finally stepped up to the platform, his voice cutting through the noise with practiced authority. He spoke of lineage, of potential, of the rare chance to claim a creature of remarkable spirit. His tone carried a rhythm that kept the crowd hooked, and every word fed their anticipation. When he announced the starting price, several hands lifted without hesitation. The bidding launched into motion, quick and confident. Numbers climbed as the trader in the front placed his offer. The man with the weathered hat countered. Another bidder joined in from the side. Each call raised the tension. The horse paced restlessly, reacting to the rising energy around it. A worker muttered that the animal could sense the intensity of the people. The girl listened quietly, her fingers pressing harder into the leather strap she held. A gust of wind brushed past her, lifting her hair as she blinked against the dust. Instead of leaning back like those around her, she stepped a little closer to the fence, drawn as if something inside her urged her forward. The bidding continued climbing. Voices grew louder, and excitement mixed with frustration as more bidders dropped out. The trader scowled when another man outbid him. The older rancher adjusted his hat and raised his offer again. The auctioneer worked steadily, his voice rising and falling in a pattern that pulled everyone deeper into the moment. The horse stopped pacing only to lift its head high, nostrils flaring, eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for something it recognized. Then, without warning, the girl moved. She slipped under the front rail before anyone could stop her. A collective gasp rippled outward as people realized what she had done. The nearest adults reached out, but she had already stepped into the open space between the fence and the horse. The workers froze in shock, aware of how dangerous it was to get that close. Even the auctioneer paused, his voice breaking mid-sentence as he saw the child standing where no one dared to stand. The horse turned toward her, muscles tensing, ears pricking forward. The crowd held its breath, afraid of what might happen next. The men who had been bidding stumbled backward, pushing others aside as fear surged through them. The workers whispered warnings, urging the girl to step back, but she didn't move. She stood firm, holding the leather strap at her side. Every eye in the yard fixed on her. Every sound faded into stillness. The girl lifted her chin slightly, meeting the horse's gaze with calm that no one understood. For a moment, the world narrowed to only the two of them, a wild creature and a young girl facing each other in the center of the auction yard. And then came the moment that shocked everyone there, a moment so unexpected that the entire crowd leaned forward, waiting to see what she would do next as the impossible began to unfold in front of them. The yard stayed silent in a way it never had before. Even the workers who usually shouted instructions fell still, their hands frozen midair. The wild horse faced the young girl as if the noise of the auction no longer mattered. The girl stepped closer, slow and steady, her feet brushing against the dirt while her eyes rested on the animal with an unusual calm. The crowd expected the horse to rear again or bolt to the far end of the pen, yet it did neither. It held its ground as though trying to understand her. Someone near the back whispered that the workers should pull her out, but no one dared move. They feared that the slightest motion might break whatever strange connection was forming. The girl raised her hand slightly, not enough to touch the horse, just enough to show she wasn't afraid. She had the kind of quiet that didn't come from bravery alone. It was the calm of someone who knew what they were doing even if no one else understood. The leather strap she held hung at her side, worn and soft, the kind of thing that had been used many times before. The horse lowered its head inch by inch, ears turning as if listening to something only it could hear. Dust floated between them in the warm air, marking the space like a line neither wanted to cross too fast. The girl took another step, and every heart watching thudded harder. Her shoes pressed into the dirt, her shoulders squared with purpose. For a moment, the wild creature stopped moving completely. The stillness was so sharp that even the wind seemed to pause. A worker finally whispered her name under his breath, as if trying to remind her she wasn't supposed to be there. But she didn't respond. She stood close enough for the horse to see the small scratches on her hands and the faint crease in her brow. She didn't show fear, only a strange mix of gentleness and resolve. It made people around her shift uncomfortably, unsure whether they were witnessing something dangerous or something remarkable. The auctioneer cleared his throat, trying to regain control, but his voice failed him again when the horse took a step toward the girl instead of away from her. The crowd gasped. The animal's hooves pressed the ground softly, not at all like its earlier forceful pacing. The girl held her breath as the horse drew near. She lifted her hand a little higher, but still didn't reach out. She understood that touching it too soon might break the fragile trust forming between them. The horse leaned forward, its powerful neck stretching as its nose brushed the air just inches from her palm. A sound rose from the crowd, half fear, half awe. This was the same horse that had sent grown men stumbling backward in panic. Yet here it was, standing inches from a child who hadn't taken a single step back. The workers stared, unsure whether to intervene or stay frozen. Then one moment shifted everything. The horse exhaled, a slow and deep breath that rippled through the silent yard. The girl let her hand rest gently against its muzzle in a soft touch that lasted only a second. But that second was enough to send a wave of disbelief across the crowd. The horse didn't rear or jerk away. It simply stood there, allowing the moment to hold. People exchanged stunned looks, whispering theories, trying to make sense of it. Some said the horse must have been tired. Others argued that the girl had done something strange to calm it. None of them knew the truth, and the confusion only stirred more curiosity. The girl lowered her hand and stepped back just a little, giving the horse space again. The animal watched her closely, its breathing steady, its earlier rage faded into something calmer but still alert. The workers finally snapped out of their shock and hurried forward to help her out of the pen, though they approached carefully, unsure how the horse might react. The girl stepped back through the fence without resistance, and once she was out, the horse paced again, though not with the same frantic energy as before. The auctioneer tried to resume the bidding, but most of the crowd couldn't focus on numbers anymore. They kept talking about the girl, replaying the scene in their minds. The man with the weathered hat frowned thoughtfully. He had seen many skilled handlers over the years, but none could have walked into a pen like that and come out untouched. The trader beside him stared at the empty space where the girl had stood, scratching his jaw in disbelief. He muttered that something didn't add up. People around him nodded. They wondered who she was and how she had learned to do something so unexpected. The girl walked to the far side of the yard, away from the noise. She held the leather strap tightly and kept her head down, as if wanting to slip into the crowd unnoticed. A woman called out to her, asking if she was all right, but the girl only nodded and continued walking. A few people followed her with their eyes, sensing there was more to her story than anyone understood. The bidding resumed, though the energy felt different now. Every person who raised a hand kept glancing toward the girl, as if she held some secret that changed the value of the horse completely. The price climbed again. The rancher raised his hand with determination. The trader countered sharply, and a newcomer joined in, pushing the auction into a heated back and forth. The horse watched the movement of people, ears flicking as though it sensed the rising stakes. The girl stood at a distance, listening. She didn't join the noise or speak to anyone. Her gaze stayed fixed on the horse, not with longing but with concern. She looked as if she understood the consequences of the bidding more deeply than the buyers themselves. When the trader made another aggressive offer, she flinched slightly, as though imagining the future that might await the horse under his care. People whispered about her, guessing who she might be. Some said she came from a ranch nearby. Others thought she must have experienced training horses, but no one knew for certain. The workers exchanged looks, recalling the way she had moved, the way the horse had responded. One of them muttered that she seemed familiar but couldn't place her. Another said he had seen her earlier near the stables, looking worried. The horse became restless again as the bidding reached its final round. It kicked up dirt, shook its head, and paced with renewed frustration. The auctioneer pushed through the tension, calling for the last offers. The rancher gave one more bid, his jaw set. The trader countered, unwilling to back down. The crowd grew louder, torn between hope and dread. The girl closed her eyes, her knuckles white around the leather strap. The auctioneer prepared to call the winning bid. The crowd leaned in, ready for the conclusion. But before he could speak, the horse let out a sharp cry that echoed across the yard, startling everyone. It reared again, thrashing against the ropes, pulling the workers off balance. Dust rose in a thick cloud as the animal fought wildly, its earlier calm shattered. People stumbled back, shielding their faces. The auctioneer dropped his gavel in surprise. Workers shouted, trying to regain control. The horse's hooves hit the ground with a force that made the fence tremble. The sudden violence set panic through the crowd all over again. Through the chaos, the girl stepped forward instinctively, but she stopped herself at the edge of the crowd, torn between fear and the urge to help. Her eyes widened as the horse pulled hard enough to snap one of the knots loose. Someone grabbed her shoulder, pulling her back before she could move any closer. The tension reached a breaking point. The animal's rage grew, the workers struggled, and the crowd cried out warnings. The bidding, the excitement, the curiosity, everything dissolved into a moment that threatened to turn dangerous fast. And just when it seemed the situation might spiral beyond anyone's control, the horse fixed its eyes on the girl again through the cloud of dust, its body trembling, its breath sharp. The girl stared back, frozen in place as the entire yard braced for whatever would happen next. The horse's wild eyes locked onto the girl through the swirling dust, and for a moment time seemed to stretch. The crowd's noise softened into a low hum as if the world had stepped back to watch what these two would do next. The workers kept shouting, but their voices drifted into the background. The girl stood trembling, not from fear alone, but from a strange mix of worry and responsibility. She knew the horse wasn't lashing out at random. Something deeper was pushing it toward this edge, something no one had taken the time to see. When the horse jerked again, knocking down one of the handlers, the girl stepped forward, despite the hand still gripping her arm. She pulled herself free without looking back. Her boots scraped the dirt as she moved slowly toward the pen, not too fast, not too close. She lifted her hand gently, just like before. The horse paused, its muscles still tight, breath sharp and uneven. The workers froze mid-struggle, unsure whether her presence would calm or provoke it more. The rancher from earlier watched with narrowed eyes. He had seen animals lose control before, but this situation felt different. It wasn't normal anger from a wild horse. It held fear, confusion, and something else he couldn't name. He rubbed his jaw, trying to understand what the girl saw that the rest of them kept missing. The trader muttered under his breath about the delay, complaining that his winning moment had been interrupted. But even he couldn't look away from the scene unfolding. Each time the girl moved closer, the horse's breathing changed. The crowd sensed it, holding their breath, waiting for either calm or disaster. The girl reached the fence, slipping through the lower gap before anyone could stop her. She walked slowly across the pen, her hands open at her sides. The dust settled around her feet as she approached the horse with the caution of someone who understood the weight of every step. She whispered something so soft no one could hear. Her voice didn't shake. The horse's ears flicked toward her, catching her words, recognizing the tone if not the meaning. Bit by bit, the animal lowered its head again, shaking off the tension as if tired from fighting the world. One of the ropes swung loose from its neck, and the girl reached out to catch it gently. The horse didn't pull away when her fingers closed around it. It took several long breaths, as if grounding itself while she guided it to the center of the pen. The crowd let out a collective sigh. The workers stepped back, giving the horse space. Once the dust thinned, the girl's face came into clearer view. She looked tired, almost older than her age suggested. Her eyes held something that made the rancher finally recognize her. He had seen her once before at a distant ranch where her family worked for a season. She had helped an injured Mary there, staying with it through the night until help arrived. Back then, he had noticed the same unusual calm in her, a calm that came from being around horses in ways other people didn't understand. Still, even knowing that didn't explain why this particular wild horse responded to her so strongly. The auctioneer tried to regain control, announcing that the bidding would continue once the horse was secured, but nobody moved to restart. The girl stayed close to the horse, whispering again, and her words seemed to soften the creature. A worker approached carefully and asked if she wanted to step out so they could handle things properly. She shook her head and said she'd stay until it settled. The man didn't argue. Something about her voice left no room for doubt. The rancher stepped toward the fence and called to the auctioneer, asking if the sale could be paused. The trader complained loudly, insisting there was no need for delays, but others supported the rancher, saying the girl's safety and the horse's condition should come first. Arguments rose across the crowd. Some believed the horse was too dangerous to sell to anyone except a trained handler. Others insisted the girl should be allowed to speak, since she seemed to understand it better than the rest. The horse lifted its head and nudged her shoulder gently, almost protectively. That small motion silenced many of the arguments. People exchanged looks filled with curiosity and suspicion. The connection between the two wasn't normal, at least not for a horse that had been captured only a few days earlier. One worker whispered that maybe the horse recognized her from somewhere. Another said that wasn't possible, as the animal had come from land far beyond where she lived. The guesses grew stranger the longer people talked. They said maybe she had some uncommon skill, or perhaps she had raised a horse that looked just like this one. No theory fit perfectly. The mystery only deepened. Meanwhile, the trader who wanted the horse grew impatient. He raised his voice at the auctioneer, complaining that the girl was delaying a serious sale. The rancher snapped back, telling him to respect the situation. The two men glared at each other, their rivalry starting to show more clearly. The crowd shifted its attention to them, sensing another conflict rising behind the main one. The girl stayed focused on the horse, adjusting the rope slowly so it wouldn't tighten on the animal's neck again. She checked its hooves, its breathing, its trembling muscles. When she reached for a strap near its shoulder, the horse flinched hard. It jerked sideways, almost knocking her over. A gasp spread through the yard. But she steadied herself and looked closely at the area where the horse had reacted. There, beneath the rough coat, she spotted a swollen mark hidden under dirt and tangled hair. She brushed the area with careful fingers. The horse tensed, but didn't kick. She called for water, and one of the workers brought a small bucket. She cleaned the spot gently, revealing a deep scrape that had been left untreated. The wound looked painful and fresh, likely caused by the rope or something the horse had been struggling against during transport. The rancher stepped forward, examining the injury over the fence. His expression tightened. He asked the workers if they had known about it. They shook their heads. The trader looked annoyed at the delay, but a flicker of unease crossed his eyes. Someone asked if the injury had happened before the horse arrived at the auction yard. The workers insisted they had received the horse tied and restless, but not visibly hurt like this. The girl's voice cut into the tension. She said the horse had been fighting more out of pain than temperament. The rancher agreed, noting how the animal's movements matched that of a horse trying to escape discomfort rather than cause trouble. That realization shifted the tone in the yard. People who had once been eager to bid now hesitated. They wondered why the injury hadn't been reported. They wondered who had handled the horse earlier and whether negligence or something more deliberate had been involved. Whispers spread across the crowd, suspicions growing. The trader's scowl deepened, and he insisted the injury was minor, but few believed him now. The girl looked at the injury again, her brow tightening with concern. She kept whispering to the horse, guiding it gently as she cleaned the wound with the little water she had. The horse's breathing slowed. It looked exhausted, worn down from the struggle, but calmer. The rancher stepped into the pen finally, moving with the same caution she had shown. The horse watched him closely, but didn't pull away. He crouched beside the girl, observing her work. He said she had a good eye and a steady hand. She didn't answer, focusing fully on the horse. He then asked her quietly why she had walked into the pen the first time. She hesitated, her fingers brushing the horse's muzzle again. She said she couldn't explain it clearly. She just felt the horse needed someone to listen, someone who didn't treat it like a problem to control. The rancher nodded. He believed her. Many others didn't, but her words carried a sincerity no one could deny. As she stood up, the horse leaned into her side, a gesture that made the crowd gasp again. Even the trader looked unsettled now. The auctioneer tried to regain his place, announcing that the bidding would resume once the horse was evaluated properly. But before he could continue, someone in the crowd demanded to know where the horse had come from originally. Another voice asked who had captured it. A third questioned why its paperwork had missing details. Questions piled up quickly. The workers looked confused. The trader looked irritated. The rancher frowned deeply. The girl stayed silent, watching the horse's breathing steady again. Then a worker admitted something quietly. He said the horse had arrived earlier than expected, brought in by someone the staff didn't recognize. The paperwork had been incomplete, but because the auction day was busy, they had set the horse aside, planning to fix the records later. But later never came. The yard buzzed with new suspicions. People wondered whether the horse had been taken legally or whether someone wanted to get rid of it quickly. The girl looked from the horse to the crowd, sensing the shift. The rancher exchanged glances with a few other seasoned handlers, each recognizing that something wasn't right. Before anyone could sort through the confusion, the horse suddenly lifted its head and stared toward the far edge of the yard, ears pinned, muscles tightening again. The girl followed its gaze. A figure had appeared at the back fence, watching them with cold stillness. The horse reacted first, pulling hard against the rope as if trying to move toward or away from the figure. The girl tightened her grip, struggling to calm the animal. The rancher stepped beside her, shielding her slightly. The workers noticed the figure and began shouting at them to leave. But the figure didn't move. They stood there, silent and unmoving, as the horse trembled violently, and then something else became clear. The horse recognized that person. The yard erupted into confusion again as tension surged, and the story's hidden conflict stepped out of the shadows with a force no one could ignore. The night after the narrow escape from the canyon, the wind kept moving around the house in a restless way, brushing against the windows as if it carried warnings no one could fully hear. The girl barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the wild horse bolting between the rocks, the pack on his back bouncing with every stride, the stranger's shadow following like a threat that refused to fade. Morning came slow, with gray light spreading across the small room she used as her own. She sat up as soon as she felt it, knowing she would not get another minute of peace until she checked on the horse. She pulled on her boots, wrapped her coat around her, and slipped outside before the sun had cleared the ridge. The ranch was quiet. Only the steady creak of the barn roof and the low breath of cattle out in the field broke the silence. When she reached the corral, the horse lifted his head right away. His coat still held that storm-brushed look, but his eyes were clear and steady. He seemed calmer with the morning, though she could see a hint of unrest in the way he shifted his weight. She climbed the gate and sat on the top rail, letting him get used to her presence again. She did not touch him this time. She only watched, the same way she had at the auction before her voice rose above the crowd and changed everything. For a moment, she thought about how different things would be if she had stayed quiet that day. The horse would be with some buyer who only wanted his strength. She would be helping unload feed or gather tools instead of worrying about a stranger who appeared out of nowhere with a claim he refused to explain. But the thought left her with a cold feeling, because she knew deep down that she was meant to cross paths with that horse. Something about him had pulled her the first time she saw him standing restless in the auction pen. She had not been able to ignore it. And now that same pull felt even stronger. The main conflict around them grew with each hour the stranger stayed in town. Word traveled fast. The ranch hands kept glancing toward the road as if the man might ride up at any moment. Folks at the general store whispered about him. Some said he had been asking questions about land deals that happened years back. Others said he was searching for something hidden near the ridge. No one had a full story. That made it worse. Rumors spread like wildfire, and each version made the man sound more dangerous than the last. The girl sensed she had stepped into something deep, something she could not escape just by wishing it away. Later that morning she went inside to help with chores, but her mind stayed fixed on the horse. Whenever she tried to focus on other things, she felt a tug in her chest. She finally returned to the corral with a brush and a rope, hoping the horse would allow her to get closer. She moved slow, talking in a low voice, letting him smell the rope first. He stepped back once, then stood still. She felt relief settle over her as she stroked the side of his neck. The horse leaned into the brush, and for a moment nothing felt dangerous. It was just the two of them in the open air, with the quiet of the ranch wrapping around them. But the moment did not last long. A heavy sound echoed from the road, a wagon. She turned immediately. A figure stood in the back of it, tall, steady, watching the ranch with a look that made her heart pound. It was the stranger. She backed away from the horse without taking her eyes off him. The wagon did not stop, but the stare he gave her lingered long after the wheels rolled out of sight. She felt as if he had taken something from her with that look. Some truth she had not yet spoken. She went inside as fast as she could, unsure if he had seen her fear. As the day moved on, tension filled the ranch like the air before a storm. The horse paced the corral as if he sensed the same dangers she did. She tried to keep herself busy, helping in the barn, running errands, but her mind kept circling back to the canyon and the strange pack strapped across the horse's back that morning. She wondered again what the man wanted from them. Why would he risk chasing a horse through unforgiving terrain unless he believed the animal carried something worth it? And why did he claim ownership with no proof? These questions pressed against her thoughts with growing force. Late in the afternoon, she decided the best way to understand anything would be to search the pack more closely. She waited until the sky softened with the colors of sundown. When the ranch hands had tired out and the activity settled, she slipped back to the corral. The horse let her near and even lowered his head as if he understood her concern. She loosened the straps and pulled the old pack off his back. It felt heavier than she remembered, and something inside shifted with a dull sound. She carried it to a quiet corner behind the barn. She opened it slow, careful not to spill anything. At first, she saw only plain items, a piece of cloth, a folded map, an empty tin. But at the bottom was a small wooden box wrapped in worn leather. Her breath caught the moment she saw it. She lifted it out and held it in both hands. It looked old, older than anything she had ever handled. The leather was cracked in places, and the wood felt smooth from years of touch. Someone had cared for it. She thought about opening it right away, but a cold push of worry stopped her. What if the stranger had been following them because of this? What if opening it changed something she could not change back? She slipped the box inside her coat instead, planning to hide it somewhere safe until she understood more. Before she stood up, she heard footsteps. Not heavy ones, but careful ones. She froze. A voice called her name. It was one of the ranch hands. He asked if she needed help with anything. She swallowed and said she was fine. She stood slowly, brushing dust from her coat, hoping he would not notice the box. He looked at her for a long second, then nodded and walked away. She waited until he was gone before returning the pack to the barn, leaving it open so no one thought she was hiding something. Night arrived with a sharp chill. She stayed close to the house with the wooden box tucked beneath her blankets. Her thoughts kept circling back to the stranger. Would he come back? Did he know she had taken something from the pack? She replayed every detail from the canyon, from the chase, from his angry claim at the auction. None of it made sense, but she knew one thing clearly. The horse was part of something much bigger than a simple sale. Sleep came in short pieces, broken by the wind rattling the windows and the sound of a distant owl. When dawn returned, she hurried outside with the wooden box still hidden in her coat. She planned to find a place far from the busy paths of the ranch where she could open it without fear of being seen. But before she reached the corral, she saw a figure standing near the fence. This time she didn't need to look twice to know who it was. The stranger had returned, and he stood in the early light with a look that sent fear rising inside her. He did not say a word. He simply stared at the horse, then at her, as if trying to read what she had learned. She gripped her coat tight, keeping the box pressed against her. She knew one wrong move could change the course of everything. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the ground. The air between them held a charged tension that felt ready to break. She wanted to run, but she stood still. The horse moved closer to the fence, ears forward, watching them both. For one quiet second, all three seemed locked in the same moment, connected by something none of them fully understood yet. She felt the pressure of secrets building around them, the kind that shift lives and reveal truths hidden for years. Whatever the stranger wanted, he would not walk away empty-handed. And whatever she was about to learn, she sensed it would reshape everything she thought she knew about the horse, the pack, and the story behind them. The tension deepened as the stranger took one slow step closer. The girl felt the box burn against her coat like a spark waiting for flame. The horse snorted and pawed the ground, sensing the rise of danger. And before anyone said a word, she knew the next moments would pull them straight toward the turning point that would decide everything from here on. The stranger took another slow step toward her, and for a moment the world felt smaller, as if everything had tightened around the ranch yard. She kept one hand on her coat, feeling the wooden box hidden beneath the fabric. The horse shifted at the fence, muscles tense, eyes fixed on the man as if ready to shield her if needed. The tension that had been building for days reached its peak, and she felt her heartbeat echo in her ears. But instead of anger or accusation, the stranger let out a long breath that seemed to drain something out of him. He looked tired, more worn than dangerous, and his voice came low when he finally spoke. He said he never meant to bring trouble to the ranch. He explained that the pack the horse carried held something that belonged to his family, something he had been searching for since he was old enough to leave home. He had been following tracks for weeks, trying to piece together the trail. He believed the horse had been stolen long before the auction, along with the wooden box. When he saw the horse that day, he was certain his search was nearly over. But when she stepped between him and the bidding crowd, he panicked. He had expected a fight, not a young girl defending a wild horse with a boldness he didn't understand. She stayed quiet, letting him speak. As he talked, she noticed the way his hands trembled slightly. Not from anger, but from something that looked like fear mixed with relief. When he finished, there was a long pause. She pulled the box from her coat and held it out in both hands. His eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment he simply stared at it as if it held more weight than its size could explain. He stepped forward slowly and reached out, but she didn't let go right away. She asked him what was inside. If the horse had been pulled into something dangerous, she had every right to know. He hesitated, then nodded. He opened the box with care, revealing a stack of papers wrapped in cloth and a small carved emblem. The papers looked old, edges worn, ink faded in places. He explained they were land documents belonging to his family, tracing back to a claim lost generations ago. The emblem, carved from dark wood, was a marker passed down through the years as proof of that claim. Someone had taken them during a dispute long before he was born. Without these items, his family had nothing to show for the land they once owned. As he spoke, the tension in her chest began to loosen. She realized the conflict had never been about the horse himself, but about what the horse had carried unknowingly across miles of land. She finally handed the box over. The stranger accepted it with the careful gratitude of someone holding the last piece of a long puzzle. He said he would have understood if she had kept it hidden, but by giving it back she had shown more honesty than some grown men he had dealt with along the way. Still, one thing remained unclear. If the box was all he wanted, why had he chased the horse so fiercely? He explained that the horse was the only lead he had. He did not know if the thief had hidden the documents or if someone else was using the horse to transport them. He admitted he had grown desperate, afraid he would lose the trail again. In his panic, he made the mistake of claiming the horse without proof, hoping to scare off anyone who stood in his way. She looked at the ground, hearing the truth in his voice. She wasn't angry anymore, but she wasn't ready to trust him fully either. The horse was standing close now, watching both of them with steady eyes. She reached out and stroked his neck, feeling the warmth beneath his coat. The stranger lowered his head in a quiet apology. He said he had no claim on the horse and understood now that the animal had found someone he trusted. He assured her he would not return to take him away. The ranch hands approached at a distance, having heard parts of the conversation. Instead of trouble, they saw a resolution forming. The air around them felt lighter. The stranger placed the box inside his coat and said he planned to travel back to his family once he gathered enough supplies. He thanked her again, not just for returning what he had searched for, but for reminding him that not everyone he met on this long hunt saw him as a threat. Before he left, he reached out to touch the horse gently on the shoulder. The horse accepted the gesture without flinching, which surprised the man enough to bring a faint smile to his tired face. He climbed onto his wagon and drove off slowly, not once looking back as the dust settled behind him. The ranch grew quiet again, the kind of quiet that felt peaceful rather than tense. The girl watched the horizon until the wagon disappeared. The horse nudged her shoulder, as if sensing her mixed emotions. She turned to him and let out a breath she had been holding since the beginning of this whole ordeal. With the conflict resolved, the weight resting on her chest finally lifted. She wrapped her arms around the horse's neck, thankful that he had come into her life in such an unexpected way. She knew many people at the auction had only seen a wild animal with no clear future. But she had seen something else, something deep in his eyes that told her he was meant for more. In the days that followed, the ranch settled back into its usual rhythm. The horse adapted quickly, learning routines and trusting her in ways no one expected. The townsfolk who had gossiped about the stranger now shifted their attention back to everyday matters. Some even came by to see the horse after hearing bits of the story. They asked about the strange pack and the chase through the canyon, curious about every detail. She told them pieces of it but kept some parts close to her heart, knowing not everything had to be shared. She also spent time thinking about the man's long search and how easily misunderstandings could spark conflict. It made her reflect on how important it was to listen before deciding who someone might be. The truth about the land documents and the emblem reminded her that history was full of stories people often never heard. Stories that could shape families, journeys, and even the wild animals caught in between. When she rode the horse for the first time in an open field, she felt a connection that seemed stronger than any fear she had carried. The horse moved with a grace that came from trust rather than training. Every step felt steady, every breath aligned with her own. She understood then that the moment she spoke up at the auction had changed both of their paths in a way neither could have predicted. Weeks passed, and she kept the memory of the wooden box and its secrets tucked away in her mind. She felt proud knowing she had played a part in resolving something much older than her own story. And each time she looked at the horse grazing in the pasture, she felt grateful for the courage that had led her to him despite the uncertainty. In the calm that followed, the ranch grew brighter. The morning sun seemed warmer, and the quiet moments around the corral felt more meaningful. The horse, once a restless figure in an auction pen, had become a steady companion who brought confidence to her days. She no longer saw him as a mystery to unravel, but as a partner in the everyday adventure of life on the ranch. The story that had begun with a surprising act at an auction ended in a way she had never expected, but it left her with something she would carry for years. She learned that sometimes doing the right thing sparked challenges, but those challenges often led to connections that shaped lives for the better. She learned that trust could grow in the most unlikely places and that standing up for something you believe in could open the door to understanding. Most of all, she learned that one choice, one moment of courage, could change the course of not just her story, but the story of others as well. And as she walked beside the horse toward the open pasture one quiet afternoon, she felt the peaceful certainty that their journey, though filled with challenges, had led them exactly where they were meant to be.